Hey, what's up, guys? This is going to be something that's actually different on my channel, and in fact, I think this is going to be the first non-EU4 gaming content ever on my channel. But with that being said, like most things that I do, I usually like to make a kind of prelude thing talking about it. Much to no avail, actually, come to think of it. Like, I know my Brandenburg series where I make a whole 30-minute video talking about it beforehand, and then in every single video people ask me the same questions, which I've like talked about in my initial video. But yeah, with that being said, that's what we're going to be doing here as well. And I just am wondering sort of if you guys would leave your comments if you're interested or anything like that in this, then I will actually go ahead and shoot a short series on this game. But what this game actually is going to be is me ranting for a moment, and I'm sure some of you probably aren't that interested in hearing it, but what I want to talk about is why I sort of like the initial Rome Total War games, etc., the old Total War games, what I like about them briefly, and then kind of the Total Wars franchise kind of fall from grace, in my opinion, what I didn't like about their games for a period, and then I'm going to talk about what I do like about Total War Warhammer and why I'm really interested in playing through a campaign. So with that being said, the first Total War game that I played was Medieval Total War, and it was freaking awesome. I mean, this was so old. In many ways, it's kind of laughable to compare it to something like EU4, but in other ways, you know, when I was a kid, it was the only thing available, and what it did, for those of you who have played the game, you'll probably agree with me, because it kind of became legendary status. Medieval Total War was mostly like kind of events, like in EU4, like an event would pop up, and you would actually move from one province to another, and you just click on that province, you end your turn, and in the next turn you would arrive. But what it did so well was all the sort of really simple things like the music and the events, the whole feel to the game, you know, the notifications, everything about it was wonderfully done, even though it's kind of laughable to compare it to EU4 in the sense that, for example, Portugal, the whole of Portugal was one single province. That kind of thing, and in its complexity, the grand strategy game was kind of a joke, but it was still, for its era, incredibly cool and entertaining. So when Rome Total War came out, I actually picked it up, and maybe sometime after it had came out, I was just a kid, and Rome Total War stepped it up to a whole nother level where you could actually, rather than just having a stack which would move from one province to another, you actually had a stack which had like a movement range and could move around the map. It was incredibly cool. You had generals. The generals, you'd have like a family tree. The generals would gain negative and positive traits. They would have children. And it was kind of, I don't know actually how the coding worked, but it seemed like a really good general would have a tendency to have better children, whereas like a garbage general wouldn't. Incredibly cool mechanics in the game, which took it up a whole nother level, and I honestly think, guys, Rome Total War is such a good game. It is honestly, like, I feel like booting it up. I own it on Steam. It's only like a few bucks. I feel like playing it every now and then. Like, even in this day and age, it's obviously lacking in graphics, but the graphics were on point and incredible back in the day. It really holds up its own even now. It is just an incredible game. I think there are so many differences between real-time strategy games. Like, I think StarCraft is such a different game, even though I guess it is technically in the same genre, that they're kind of uncomparable, the two. But in its own niche kind of grand strategy campaign, but also the combat, the two main focuses of a Total War game, I feel like Rome Total War did it better than any other strategy game or real-time strategy game, and has like legendary status in my book. with that being said, when Medieval Total War 2 came out, that was also good, but it began to have what, in my opinion, was drawbacks. And one thing that I really liked about Rome Total War was, I would say, the combat was quite arcadey. And what I mean by that is everything had like really clearly defined purposes. Like, for example, if you think about the movement, there was basically like a set infantry movement speed, and the absolute vast majority of infantry would move at that rate. And then if a unit had fast moving as like a perk to the unit, it would move one tier higher than that. And all skirmishing units had a tendency to move one tier higher than that. And that would be reflected in the fact that they would have no armor, for example. But there were other units, like, for example, the Germanic Knight Raiders, who also neglected the armor, and they had a perk to be just straight up faster than other units. Like, they're really light on their feet. But then there was another tier up from that of movement, which would be like a slow cavalry unit. And a good example of this would be camels. There are actually camels in the game, and they move like slow cavalry. So it's like base movement, fast infantry, slow cavalry, cavalry speed would be the next speed. And the absolute vast majority of cavalry would all move at that speed. And then there would be light cavalry speed, which is again like cavalry skirmishing units, which would be faster than that. And that's an example of just like something really basic like the movement, and each unit kind of fell into its own position. But with that being said, it might have been comparatively unrealistic to Medieval Total War 2, where the knights were quite slow and purposeful. But from a gaming perspective, my goodness, the combat just felt so much better, in my opinion, playing Rome Total War, where you could flank units. And the other thing about Rome Total War was the way that your cavalry charges with flanking units would have devastating impact when you have a successful flank. Medieval Total War, it was almost like Mount and Blade. If you ever played Mount and Blade, where you're using a lance and you have to actually lower the lance. The mechanics in Medieval Total War 2 were like, very often your knights would have their swords out, you would tell them to charge, and they would pull their lances out. They wouldn't lower them in time. It was just very clunky compared, in my opinion. However, the game was still top-notch, good game, Medieval Total War 2. Then along came Empire Total War, guys. And Empire Total War, in many ways, it seemed like it was new, do you know what I mean? It was so much newer. There'd been a long time in between the other games, and it felt almost like a magnum opus. There were different theaters of the world that you could play in, and with that being said, there were major drawbacks once again. In my opinion, the game fell even further from grace, where it almost became ridiculous. I remember playing Empire Total War, and having 2 units of riflemen. You know, I would have a full unit of riflemen, and the enemy would have a unit of riflemen, and they would be lined up in front of each other, like parallel to each other, shooting at each other. And I would have it on triple speed, which was the maximum speed. And I kid you not, you know, you have a unit of 150 guys, and they one by one, just randomly from that crowd of people, take a shot, like, and then the opponent, one guy within their mob, shoots at you, you shoot, and of course it's a miss, right? You miss, you don't kill them, and you're sitting there on triple speed with riflemen shooting each other one by one. And the drawback really came down to the fact that there were technologies. And the whole idea is that your original units are not well trained. You know, they don't march in formation. They don't draw their rifles and fire in unanimously. That's the kind of idea, the concept that it's trying to incorporate into the game, but just from a practical perspective, you would line up your units in front of other units, tell them to attack, and turn the speed up to triple speed because it's so painstakingly slow, and sit there for like 15 minutes for these units to kill each other. And yes, that kind of issue did begin to resolve itself as your units became more well trained with technologies and higher tier units, etc., where they all, draw their weapons and fire in formation, and they have more accuracy. But it was just such an oversight, in my opinion. I mean, it was disgusting. It was really disgusting. And at that point, I began to look at Total War games in a completely different light. I couldn't believe that that would be allowed to fly and that they would make a game like that. I was a big proponent of being disappointed in Empire Total War. I don't know if that's kind of the unanimous thought process on that game, but personally, I really did not like it or appreciate it. It wasn't until Rome 2 was announced that really got me intrigued and excited. And the reason that I really was intrigued and excited for Rome 2 is I really felt like I really like that era personally. It's a really exciting era. Sort of the Roman Empire rising to power. But with the other thing is, I felt like Rome, the original game, was such a good game, and even a few years ago when Rome 2 was announced, or released rather, I mean, how could you mess it up? That is how I thought. Like, how could you mess it up? You could just take the same game, and you could reskin everything, graphically update the game, and it would be fantastic. So that's what I was thinking in terms of the gameplay mechanics and the experience. And I was just thinking, imagine if they improved like the amount of buildings, the variation in buildings, what the buildings do, have the building tech trees increased. Oh man, Rome 2 could be such a cool game. Like, just take the same game from a starting point and just improve it like a little bit more, modernize it. And unfortunately, when the game launched, not only did they not do that, in my opinion, in some ways, it was actually more simple, the buildings and so on, and there was actually less than Rome, to my astonishment. But they didn't even get the combat right or anything about the original game. I'm not a big fan of Rome 2. I do still own it. I pre-purchased the game, and I'm so disappointed. I told myself I was never going to pre-purchase another game after that, although I do make exceptions. I was just so disillusioned when I saw Rome 2, guys. A lot of people know that it was a complete buggy mess when they made it, when they launched it. And I really thought that I was completely disillusioned. I thought I'd never be playing another Total War game again. Not that long after that did they kind of announce this game, which is far from new, obviously. But there were a few Total War games in between, like Attila, which I didn't play, but I heard good things. And, I'm a big fan of Warhammer. So when they announced this game, it piqued my interest. But I just didn't have the confidence and faith in Creative Assembly or their team until I actually saw the game released. And I saw the footage. It looked really cool, like all the teasers and so on. But when I actually saw the game for myself, players playing the game, they really resolved so much of the issues that I hated about Rome 2, for example. Let alone the broken, buggy mess that it was. The fact that there was no impact on cavalry charges, your cavalry you'd flank a unit, charge in, and you just run into them and high five, right? Just really frustrating. But everything else, it didn't have the same feel as Rome. There wasn't the same clearly defined roles of the different units, in my opinion. It just was a hot mess. The buildings, everything was, I would say, you'd be lucky when you do a one-for-one comparison with the new Rome and the old Rome if it even lifted that thing up to the original benchmark of a game that was made about 10 years earlier, about a decade earlier. And seeing this game for myself, I realized a lot of those issues were not there. So despite being really disillusioned, frustrated, and I suppose begrudging against the team, I decided to pick it up because it looked like a good game. And I can tell you right now, initially, I was disappointed after playing, because they had a DLC faction that could only be used if you pre-purchased the game, and I did pre-purchase the game for that reason. After seeing, I guess, let me try to get this right in my mind. I guess I was watching beta footage and stuff like that, so I pre-purchased the game like 1 day before it released, if I remember correctly, to get that faction. And it's now an available faction, even though I think at one stage they said it wasn't going to be, but you do have to buy it for a few bucks. And that faction, let me just delete this save really quick, this is the Grand Campaign, the Warriors of Chaos. Now, not knowing much about Warhammer Fantasy, I do know a lot about Warhammer 40k, and having seen Fantasy, the little amount that I did see of this game, and I mean the Warhammer itself, not this game, guys, Chaos, I mean, holy crap, it's like Empire are like little dudes, they're like men, right? And then you got greenskins, they're like greenskins from 40k, but they don't have guns and bolts and stuff, they got swords. And, you know, you got some undead, great, he's some puny, he's like, you know, some Twilight version of the humans. And then you have, like, Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space, don't you mean the Warriors of Chaos, Monk? No, I mean Chaos Space Marines, like, in Fantasy, like, come on. Look at this guy, look at this, like, little cinematic here. The guys are just so beast. It's not just that they're chaotic, they're, like, on a whole nother level. They're basically, like, Norsemen on steroids. Even though a lot of Norsemen are on steroids, they're like literally, it's like insane. Anyway, I always was a big fan of Chaos in Fantasy. They're the only faction I ever knew anything about, really, or cared about. They're like absolute brutally, look at this, you know, their cinematics is just the Chaos dudes crushing Empire and stuff, right? So that was my most interesting faction when I played them. But the thing is, they actually are a horde. And because I never played Attila, there was a new mechanic introduced, and the Warriors of Chaos are a horde faction like the hordes that were introduced, like Attila, the Huns, in that game. And having played this game a lot extensively, I like it. However, I didn't like it initially upon playing it, so I was actually disappointed with that. And then after that, I thought, well, I guess the greenskins are pretty cool. I mean, the last thing I want to play is the tiny little puny average humans, right, in a generic fantasy universe. Wow. Having been dissatisfied with the greenskins, dissatisfied with the dwarfs, and the Warriors of Chaos, which were initially, and the vampire counts for that matter. I was like, vampire counts were looking like my favorite, but they just didn't have the same ridiculously badass factor that the Warriors of Chaos should have if they were in a horde. So I was pretty disappointed overall, guys, and I thought, you know, I might as well try out the Empire. Well, it turns out
I command here
that the Empire is not only the coolest team, undisputably, it's not even, your opinion isn't valid, guys, I'm talking objectively, okay? But they're probably the coolest thing that has ever existed on the frickin' planet. Look at this guy. Emperor Karl Franz.
do not waste my potential.
Balthazar Galt. These guys are my homies. What I didn't realize because I don't know anything about Warhammer, and I know they've done like resets and so on, the original Warhammer Fantasy. Look at their province's name, Reichland. These guys are almost comically, like hilariously, some kind of amalgamation between Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, and other iterations of Germany. And they are so cool. Like, this is right up my alley, right up my boat. And what I want to say, if you've been all the way up until this point listening to this video, we're going to be playing
I am
this
Prince
nation,
and Emperor.
if I was to play. And not only that, but I'm going to go full retard, fully committed, fully invested. I'm going to be ranting. I'm going to be... What I plan to do is not like a 30 sort of episodic series like my Brandenburg Let's Play, for example, but instead just chill out, record a massive session of this game, which is like a one-way game, which is like a one-way time machine into the future. And yeah, I'm going to be ranting, guys. I'm going to be talking about all kinds of things, playing as the Holy Bros, the Holy Roman Emperor himself. This faction is so cool. I love it. In fact, for me, this entire game is a one faction game. Like, I don't even look at the other factions anymore or care. It's all about the Empire. They're so cool.
Summon the Elector Counts.
Now, there are other drawbacks. I know that was a long rant, guys. That's the intention of this whole video, is to talk and prefix my series. The other thing that I didn't like so much about this game from what I had played is, unlike other Total War games from my experience, most Total War games, any faction can actually world conquest, and by that I mean inhabit every province within the game. In this game, however, basically there is, I guess the world is mostly divided between human-controlled provinces and vampires can control the same provinces, so human and vampires, and dwarfs and orcs. So basically there are provinces in what is called Badlands, which is like desert, and mountains, which are controlled by orcs and dwarfs, and the rest of the world is controlled by humans and vampires. And humans and vampires can only control their type of region, and the same goes for dwarfs and orcs. Initially, I didn't actually like that about this. Having played it, I think it's really well done. Like, if we look at this little section of the map, all of this region here would be controlled by humans and vampires, and there is like an alleyway here to other regions which are controlled by humans and vampires, and another alleyway here and access along the mountain range. And if the dwarfs and orcs will actually control this mountain range. So there are different areas of the maps. It's actually interlaced among each other, and there's like a corner of the map where it's all mountains and you have very little incentive to go in there, like as the Empire, at least initially. Whereas they would feel the same way about this big open space out here. But a lot of the world is kind of it's both terrains, and it's done really well, and that is something we can sort of look further at if I was to continue this series. And lastly, I just want to say that there's also terrain in the north, which is considered like wasteland to us, and dwarfs and orcs. But there is like Norse men up there, which are kind of like a low tier level of chaos, basically. They're like chaos marauders, like basic marauders, rather than like, you know, chaos aspirants or anything like that. Like ridiculously badass chaos warriors. With that being said, if I was to play this, guys, if you guys are interested, what I mean by that is this video gets some kind of viewage and that people are like hyped, like let's do it. I'm going to be playing as the Emperor himself. For those of you who do not know, it just gave us a shot of the Warhammer here that he's holding. This is basically a unique lord, and this is the Warhammer. It is the namesake of this franchise and this series, including 40k, I suppose. And we would be the Prince. We are the Prince. Emperor Karl Franz is the Prince of Altdorf, which is the capital of Reichland. But he is also the elected emperor. He has just been elected the emperor, and he has the Heldenhammer itself. He's incredibly badass. We're going to be playing with him, and at the very least,
I am the Supreme Patriarch.
I would love to unlock Balthazar Gelt as well. I'm not so
Grand Theogenist.
Not so into this guy. He seems pretty lame by comparison, but we could get him as well. I have one DLC, which is the Grim in the Grave, which unlocks this guy, but it's not that I was interested in this guy and the undead equivalent. You get another lord for the undead. It's actually
Sigmar's will.
Actually that I was interested in the units and so on that are available from playing, getting that DLC. So yeah, I guess I'm going to end my rant here, guys. If we were to play this, I'm going to be playing on Legendary difficulty, as I do have a lot of Total War experience. Apparently, Legendary is very hard. it's essentially the same, except it's Iron Man mode, and you cannot pause the game during battles to actually issue orders. With that being said, I do intend to do a lot of auto-resolving just for time's sake and convenience. I don't want to play out the battles. It's going to be boring for me if I do that. I'll do a combination, but mostly auto-resolving. And if we do play as Karl Franz, we get halberdiers, handgunners, and Reichsguard, which is actually a really high-tier unit. And as an Empire Lord, this guy gets a Griffin to be ultimately unlocked at a really high level, but it's a unique, more powerful Griffin, just like he is a unique, more powerful Lord. And he gains a boon to every Lord and unit we control for 5% increased movement and 10% reduction in upkeep for Reichsguard and Greatswords. Let me know, guys, if you're hyped. I probably scared away so many people who might have otherwise watched the series, because my series is so different, where it starts off with me just running my mouth for a long period of time. Whereas I know most people who are actual content producers just try to go straight in to the gameplay and not have anything of any actual substance. Ooh, shots fired. So with that being said, if you guys are here, you know, posting comments, responding to what I'm saying at the end of the video, then I know those of you who are watching are at least the best people on the planet who have come across me. And let me know, guys, should we do it? Should we do it? Should we Legendary Difficult play the Empire, who's so badass? I'm going to show you how they're badass in massive uploading sessions of about 2.5 hours, probably, I don't know, per video. Let me know, guys. I'm really into this game. I'd love to do it, but it's up to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in another video.